rescues continue tonight after some of the worst flooding West Virginia has ever seen.
The death toll from flooding in West Virginia is at least 20.
West Virginia's governor has declared a state of emergency in 44 of the state's 55 counties.
Thousands remain without power as residents throughout the state begin what's expected to be a long and expensive cleanup.
I think a lot of times we take the weather for granted and we just see it as a nuisance, but it can truly be a matter of life and death at times, and that day proved it. It's one thing to have conditions for a thunderstorm or have the right conditions for, an isolated severe thunderstorm, but pretty much all the conditions were there that day. And what made that event worse is it was terribly widespread, firstly, but it's the fact that showers and thunderstorms kept moving over the same area. Doppler radar indicated that 8 inches of rain fell. Typically in the state of West Virginia, most places receive 40 to 45 inches the entire year. So if you do the math, 8 inches into that, that gives you actually a little higher. That would be probably 20% of your annual rainfall that you can expect on average in an entire year fell within a 6-hour time frame. That amount of water flowing very rapidly. Anything in its path is pretty much going to be picked up off its foundation and pushed downstream. I hope I never see anything like that in my lifetime, and I'm sure a lot of other people feel the same way. I mean, that was just the most incredible event that I can remember. That's something I'll never forget.
I was living, as soon as you cross the bridge into town, right behind the Clendenin sign, we were staying in an apartment there because we were getting ready to move actually a little closer to Elkview. We lost everything in the flood. I saved 6 Christmas ornaments and my wedding ring. It impacted people in an astronomical way that people just really don't understand, and I think unless you were here, unless you saw it, unless you were affected, you kind of don't live in the same world or the same way of thinking that we do. We lived in the fire department for 21 days after the flood. I slept on a piece of plywood in between a filing cabinet and a toolbox for 3 weeks. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are people who are still living in campers or still have things to do to be whole again in their home, but they're not worried about it. They're over helping the elderly neighbor, they're not worried about themselves. All in all, I think it's brought the town together. I think that people have a tendency to forget that togetherness we had during the flood, that it didn't matter if I liked you or you were my worst enemy. If you needed help, I was going to help you. And 2 years later, I feel like it's not the volunteers that forget that. I feel like it's the people that live here that forget that. We're all one town. We're all one big team, and I want everybody to come together and realize that. Because if you break up into 15 different circles, you're not as strong as you are in one big circle.
Every time it rains heavily, I just pace from window to window and just watch the river. When I was younger, I used to think it was so cool when the river would get high because it was so close and all that stuff. And now, as a grown adult, I'm terrified. It's a really scary thing, especially when it gets super high because, we never thought in a million years that was going to happen. It was my first home, and I'd barely even got to decorate and stuff like that. I felt like I just finally got settled in. Then the flood happened. At this time, I didn't even have any idea that my house was getting flooded. I was just worrying about everybody else. I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta help my friends. Then someone messaged me and they're like, hey, I'm so sorry about your house. They sent me a picture of my house halfway underwater. I had no idea, because it was just beside a creek. It wasn't beside the river or anything. At first, it didn't even hit me. I was still in that I need to help people mode. I was sure my world was coming to an end, but pulled out stronger, and I'm okay. It gave me more motivation to do well because I have a lot to work for now. Like, I don't have the home I had. I don't, I've got to still look for somewhere permanent for Lincoln and I to live. It seemed like a disaster at that moment, but it kind of just helped me move on and realize that things do happen and you can get over it.